Jason Carter was once a respected Earth envoy, a diplomat sent across the stars to maintain peace and build alliances for humanity. But that was before everything went wrong. Before he uncovered the corruption and greed at the heart of the Galactic Council. They had taken advantage of the countless planets under their control, exploiting resources, enslaving populations, and creating wars for profit. Jason had exposed their crimes, and the Council didn't take kindly to being exposed. So instead of being honored for his courage, Jason was sentenced to die. They knew he couldn't live long on a harsh, uninhabited desert planet with no resources, no shelter, and no hope of survival. The Council's plan was simple: send him there, let him perish, and erase all traces of his defiance. The shuttle carrying Jason was nothing more than a prison transport, cold, impersonal, and full of security. The journey to HFY, a planet on the far edge of the galaxy, would take several days. Jason knew what awaited him on the surface of the harsh desert world. He had been briefed on it all. The twin suns that scorched the land. The sandstorms that could tear through anything in their path. The deadly creatures that roamed in search of easy prey. Jason had no illusions about his fate. He wasn't going to survive this. He spent the majority of the trip locked in a small cabin, staring out of a tiny porthole at the endless void of space. His thoughts often wandered to Earth, his family, and the life he had lost in the pursuit of truth. He regretted nothing, though. Standing up to the Council was the right thing to do, even if it cost him his life. But as the shuttle neared its destination, something unexpected happened. There was a violent shake, as if the ship had hit something. The lights flickered, and the alarm blared. Jason rushed to the cockpit, only to find the pilot frantically trying to regain control. Before he could even make sense of the situation, the shuttle lurched forward, sending Jason tumbling to the ground. The ship's trajectory veered off course, and the pilot screamed as the ship began to plummet toward the desert planet below. Jason braced himself for impact, his heart racing as the ground rushed toward him. With a final, deafening crash, everything went black. When Jason regained consciousness, he was lying on the sand, the burning sun beating down on his face. His head throbbed, and his body ached in every possible way. He could barely remember what had happened, but he quickly realized that he had somehow survived the crash. His shuttle was a wreck, and his survival gear was mostly useless, torn apart in the crash. His water supply was gone. His food was a mere handful of ration packs, barely enough to survive for a day. Looking around, Jason saw nothing but an endless sea of sand stretching out in every direction. The horizon was nothing but a blur of heat. There was no sign of life, no sign of anything, just an empty, desolate world. For a moment, despair gripped him. This was it. This was how he was going to die, alone, forgotten, on a barren planet far from home. He had no illusions left. But as he tried to push himself up, something in the distance caught his eye. A glimmer, a faint reflection of light. It was barely noticeable, just a shimmer against the harsh desert backdrop. Jason blinked, unsure if he was seeing things. He squinted, focusing on the spot where the light had flashed. It was a structure of some kind. Not a natural formation, but something man-made, or rather, alien-made. Pushing past the pain in his body, Jason stood up, determined to reach the glimmer of hope he had seen. The desert was merciless, the heat unbearable, but his desperation drove him forward. Step by step, he forced himself onward, the vision of the structure burning in his mind. After what felt like hours, the shimmering structure grew clearer, rising from the sands like a beacon. As he got closer, Jason could see that it wasn't just one building but a whole city, an ancient city made of shimmering, crystalline material. The buildings rose high into the sky, their surfaces glowing softly, refracting the light of the twin suns. It was a sight unlike anything Jason had ever seen. He stumbled toward the city, his strength fading. His body begged him to stop to rest, but Jason knew he couldn't. There was no telling when his strength would fail him, but the city was his only hope. And then, just as his vision began to blur, Jason saw movement. Figures. Tall, slender beings walking gracefully among the buildings, their long hair flowing behind them. At first, he thought they were some kind of mirage, a trick of the heat. But as he drew closer, he realized they were real. These were beings, alien beings. He collapsed to the ground, exhausted and barely conscious. But before he passed out, he saw them approach him, their glowing eyes focused on him with a mix of curiosity and concern. The last thing he felt before everything went dark was a delicate hand gently touching his forehead. Jason had no idea who they were, where they came from, or what they wanted. All he knew was that he had been given a second chance, and maybe, just maybe, this was not where his story ended. Jason slowly began to wake, his body still heavy and sluggish from the crash. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. His mind was hazy, and he couldn't make sense of his surroundings. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and then he realized something. He wasn't on the desert floor anymore. He wasn't outside at all. Instead, he was lying on a soft surface, the air cool and sweet with a strange floral scent. The light was softer, not the harsh rays of the twin suns, but a warm, gentle glow. Slowly, he sat up, his head spinning slightly as he took in his surroundings. The room he found himself in was unlike any space he had ever seen. The walls appeared to be made of the same glowing crystal material he had seen outside, only now it shimmered with an ethereal light that made the whole room seem alive. The air itself seemed to hum with energy. Jason reached for his head, trying to remember how he had ended up here. The last thing he remembered was collapsing in the desert after seeing the alien city. He had been so weak, so on the brink of death. But now he was here, alive, though uncertain of how or why. As he pushed himself up to his feet, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're awake." Jason turned quickly, his muscles tense, but relaxed when he saw who had spoken. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman. She was tall, with silvery white hair that cascaded down her back in waves. Her skin glowed with a subtle, almost otherworldly light, and her eyes shone with a golden hue, like two molten orbs. Despite her ethereal beauty, there was an air of authority about her that made it clear she was not to be underestimated. "I'm Lyra," the woman said, stepping into the room. Her voice was melodic and calm, but there was something intense in her gaze. "You're safe now." Jason's mouth was dry, and his throat was sore. He could barely get words out, but he forced himself to speak. What happened? Who are you?" Lyra smiled, though it was a sad smile. "We saved you. You were near death when we found you. We couldn't just leave you there." Jason's mind raced. "Who are you? Where am I?" Lyra's gaze softened. "This is my home, the home of my people. You are in the city of Solara." "Solara," Jason repeated, trying to piece together the information. "I thought I was on Sci-Fi, the desert planet. How did I end up here?" Lyra's expression turned somber. "Yes, you were on Sci-Fi, but you were brought here by the will of the stars. We sensed your arrival, and we were able to reach you before the desert consumed you." Jason was silent for a moment, still trying to absorb everything. It felt like a dream, a strange, impossible dream. But the way Lyra spoke with such certainty made him feel like he wasn't imagining it. There was something about her that made him believe her. Before Jason could ask more questions, two other women entered the room, both just as stunning as Lyra. The first was taller, her features sharp and graceful. Her dark hair flowed behind her like a river of ink, and her eyes, deep green and filled with mystery, held his gaze firmly. The other woman was smaller, her silver hair darker than Lyra's, and her eyes glowed with a bright, piercing blue. She had a quieter presence, but Jason could feel the power within her. Lyra gestured toward the two women. "These are my sisters. This is Kellis." She pointed to the dark-haired woman, and Vena. Jason nodded, his throat still tight with confusion. "I'm Jason. Jason Carter." "You're human," Kellis said, her voice low and steady. "We knew that the moment we saw you. But what we don't understand is why you were sent here." Liara stepped closer to him, her eyes locked onto his. "You've been exiled, haven't you? Sent to die by the Galactic Council." Jason's heart skipped a beat. "How did you know?" "We've watched the Council for a long time." Vena spoke for the first time, her voice soft yet strong. "We've seen what they've done to planets like ours. They've left nothing but ruin in their wake. And when we sensed you, we knew you had been abandoned, just as we were." Jason was stunned. "You know the Galactic Council." "We know them all too well," Lyra replied, her voice filled with quiet fury. "They've destroyed our civilization. They've taken everything from us. And now, they've left you to die in the same way." Jason's heart sank. He had known the Council was corrupt, but hearing it from these strangers, these survivors, made it even more real. They had suffered at the hands of the same ruthless group that had betrayed him. "I don't understand," Jason muttered, his mind racing. "What do you want from me? Why did you save me?" Kalis crossed her arms, a determined look in her eyes. "We don't want to leave you in the dark, Jason. You were sent here to die, yes, but you're not like the others who have been abandoned here. You're different." Liara nodded. "You have something the others didn't. The will to survive, the strength to fight back. And that's what we need. We can't do this alone." Jason swallowed hard. "Do what? What are you asking?" Vena stepped closer, her blue eyes locked onto his with a quiet intensity. "We need your help. We want to take back what was stolen from us. To fight the Galactic Council. To destroy them once and for all." Jason stood still, his breath catching in his throat. This was more than just survival. This was a mission, a cause bigger than himself. And suddenly, he felt something deep inside him stir, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He looked at each of them, Lyra, Kellis, and Vena, and he saw it. The same determination in their eyes, the same fire that burned in him. They had all been broken by the Council, but now they were ready to fight back. And maybe, just maybe, Jason had a part to play in it. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady. Liara smiled, a proud, knowing smile. "First, we need to get you ready. You're not just a survivor anymore, Jason. You're part of something much bigger." Jason nodded, understanding. This was his chance, not just for revenge, but for something greater. He was no longer the man who had been left to die on a desert planet. Now he was part of a rebellion against the very force that had tried to crush him. As Lyra, Kellis, and Vena led him deeper into the heart of their city, Jason couldn't help but feel a strange sense of belonging. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of something that would change the fate of the galaxy. Jason had no idea what to expect next, but as Lyra, Kellis, and Vena led him deeper into the heart of their city, everything about his life seemed to change. He had come from Earth, a place filled with endless cities and vast oceans, but nothing in his life could have prepared him for this world, this ancient, glowing city hidden in the desert. The more he learned about the Solera clan and their history, the more he realized just how much he had underestimated the power of these alien women. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors, leaders, and perhaps most importantly, the last of their kind. As they walked through the towering crystal structures, Jason felt a sense of awe and wonder. The city wasn't just a series of buildings. It was alive in a way that felt both beautiful and unsettling. The walls of the structures pulsed with light, as though they were breathing. The air was thick with energy, and Jason could feel the hum beneath his feet as if the very ground was alive. Lyra led him to a large chamber in the center of the city. The room was wide, open, and full of strange symbols and artifacts. The walls were covered in glowing writing that seemed to move and shift as Jason stared at it. He had no idea what it meant, but there was something about it that made his heart race, like it held the answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask yet. "This is where we gather," Lyra explained, her voice calm but full of determination. "This is where our people once planned, strategized, and fought for our freedom." Jason could sense the weight of history in the room. It was a place of great significance, a place of rebellion. He stumbled toward the city, his strength fading. His body begged him to stop to rest, but Jason knew he couldn't. There was no telling when his strength would fail him, but the city was his only hope. And then, just as his vision began to blur, Jason saw movement. Figures. Tall, slender beings walking gracefully among the buildings, their long hair flowing behind them. At first, he thought they were some kind of mirage, a trick of the heat. But as he drew closer, he realized they were real. These were beings, alien beings. He collapsed to the ground, exhausted and barely conscious. But before he passed out, he saw them approach him, their glowing eyes focused on him with a mix of curiosity and concern. The last thing he felt before everything went dark was a delicate hand gently touching his forehead. Jason had no idea who they were, where they came from, or what they wanted. All he knew was that he had been given a second chance, and maybe, just maybe, this was not where his story ended. Jason slowly began to wake, his body still heavy and sluggish from the crash. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. His mind was hazy, and he couldn't make sense of his surroundings. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and then he realized something. He wasn't on the desert floor anymore. He wasn't outside at all. Instead, he was lying on a soft surface, the air cool and sweet with a strange floral scent. The light was softer, not the harsh rays of the twin suns, but a warm, gentle glow. Slowly, he sat up, his head spinning slightly as he took in his surroundings. The room he found himself in was unlike any space he had ever seen. The walls appeared to be made of the same glowing crystal material he had seen outside, only now it shimmered with an ethereal light that made the whole room seem alive. The air itself seemed to hum with energy. Jason reached for his head, trying to remember how he had ended up here. The last thing he remembered was collapsing in the desert after seeing the alien city. He had been so weak, so on the brink of death. But now he was here, alive, though uncertain of how or why. As he pushed himself up to his feet, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're awake." Jason turned quickly, his muscles tense, but relaxed when he saw who had spoken. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman. She was tall, with silvery white hair that cascaded down her back in waves. Her skin glowed with a subtle, almost otherworldly light, and her eyes shone with a golden hue, like two molten orbs. Despite her ethereal beauty, there was an air of authority about her that made it clear she was not to be underestimated. "I'm Lyra," the woman said, stepping into the room. Her voice was melodic and calm, but there was something intense in her gaze. "You're safe now." Jason's mouth was dry, and his throat was sore. He could barely get words out, but he forced himself to speak. What happened? Who are you?" Lyra smiled, though it was a sad smile. "We saved you. You were near death when we found you. We couldn't just leave you there." Jason's mind raced. "Who are you? Where am I?" Lyra's gaze softened. "This is my home, the home of my people. You are in the city of Solara." "Solara," Jason repeated, trying to piece together the information. "I thought I was on Sci-Fi, the desert planet. How did I end up here?" Lyra's expression turned somber. "Yes, you were on Sci-Fi, but you were brought here by the will of the stars. We sensed your arrival, and we were able to reach you before the desert consumed you." Jason was silent for a moment, still trying to absorb everything. It felt like a dream, a strange, impossible dream. But the way Lyra spoke with such certainty made him feel like he wasn't imagining it. There was something about her that made him believe her. Before Jason could ask more questions, two other women entered the room, both just as stunning as Lyra. The first was taller, her features sharp and graceful. Her dark hair flowed behind her like a river of ink, and her eyes, deep green and filled with mystery, held his gaze firmly. The other woman was smaller, her silver hair darker than Lyra's, and her eyes glowed with a bright, piercing blue. She had a quieter presence, but Jason could feel the power within her. Kellis stepped forward, her sharp eyes focused on Jason. "You don't know this, but you're not the first human we've seen. A long time ago, we made contact with your people. We tried to warn them about the Galactic Council, but Earth, they didn't listen. They didn't take us seriously." Jason felt a pang of guilt. He had always been proud of Earth's strength, its position in the galaxy. But now, hearing this, he wondered if his own people had made a mistake. Had they ignored these warnings? Had they helped the Council in some way? "Earth might not have known," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But I'm here now, and I'll fight with you, whatever it takes." Vena, the quietest of the three, nodded slowly. "We need your help, Jason. But first, we need to prepare. You need to learn to fight, to survive here, and to understand the enemy we face. The Galactic Council won't give up easily. They will send their soldiers, their fleets, to eliminate us." Jason looked at each of the women, seeing the strength in their eyes. They had lived through unimaginable loss. They had lost their families, their homes, their people. Yet here they were, still fighting, still standing. He felt a fire ignite inside him, something stronger than just the need for survival. He had been given a second chance, and now he had a purpose. "I'm ready," Jason said, determination flooding his veins. Liara smiled, but it was a smile that held a deeper meaning. "Good, then we'll begin." Over the next several days, Jason's life changed in ways he never expected. He trained with the three sisters, learning their combat techniques and adapting them to his own knowledge. It was exhausting, grueling work, but Jason was determined to prove himself. The desert might have been harsh, but the training here in the heart of the city was even harsher. Kellis was the toughest of the three, pushing Jason to his limits every day. She taught him how to use the sand itself as a weapon. The desert might seem barren and lifeless, but to Kellis, it was a source of immense power. She could shape the sands into weapons, swords, shields, and barriers. It was a skill Jason found difficult to grasp at first, but with time, he began to understand how to channel his energy into the earth beneath him. The sand responded to his will, shifting and moving as he directed it. It wasn't as easy as it seemed, but Jason was determined. Lyara's training was different. Her mastery over light was incredible. She could bend light itself, shaping it into beams of pure energy that could slice through metal. At first, Jason couldn't even imagine how it worked. How could light, something as intangible as air, become a weapon? But with Lyara's guidance, he learned to harness the energy inside of him and focus it on the light around him. It wasn't perfect, but with each passing day, Jason felt himself growing stronger. Vena's power was more mysterious, but no less formidable. Unlike Lyara and Kellis, Vena didn't rely on physical strength or energy. She had the ability to manipulate the minds of others, to enter their thoughts and control their actions. She showed Jason how to protect his mind, how to defend against attacks that couldn't be seen. The mental discipline required was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Vena was quiet, almost aloof, but when she spoke, Jason knew it was important. Each sister had a different approach to training, but together, they made him stronger. They pushed him beyond his limits, and in return, Jason pushed them. He taught them tactics, ways to think like a soldier, and how to anticipate the moves of the enemy. He wasn't a warrior like they were, but he had experience. He had seen the tactics of the Galactic Council firsthand, and slowly they began to form a bond of trust and understanding. The days turned into weeks, and Jason felt himself changing. The weak, exhausted man who had crashed on the desert planet was gone. In his place stood a warrior, someone who could stand beside Lyra, Kalis, and Vena, and fight for a common cause. He was no longer alone in this battle. But just as Jason was beginning to feel ready, something unexpected happened. One evening, as the sisters were preparing for another round of training, a strange vibration shook the ground beneath them. Jason looked up at Lyra, a sense of dread filling his chest. "What's happening?" Lyra's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "They found us." Jason's heart pounded. He knew the council wouldn't sit idly by. They would come for them, no matter what. And now, it seemed, that moment had arrived. "They're sending a scout ship," Kalis said, her voice steady. "We need to act fast. We can't let them see us." Lyra turned to Jason, her golden eyes fierce. "This is it. We fight back, Jason. We take the fight to them. It's now or never." Jason nodded, his body tensed, ready for whatever was coming next. He had trained for this moment. He had prepared for it. And now he was ready to take on the Galactic Council. It was time to fight back. The battle for their freedom was about to begin. The ground beneath them trembled once more. The air seemed to grow heavier, as though the planet itself was aware of what was about to happen. Jason stood tall, his fists clenched at his sides. He had trained for weeks, honing his skills under the watchful eyes of Lyra, Kalis, and Vena. The time for preparation was over. Now it was time for action. The sisters wasted no time. Lyra, Kalis, and Vena moved with practiced ease, quickly organizing themselves into a battle formation. They knew this moment would come eventually, but now that it was here, they were ready. Jason had no experience in a battle like this, but he felt a surge of adrenaline course through his body. He had learned everything he could from the sisters, and now, the skills they had taught him would be put to the test. He glanced over at Lyra, who caught his gaze and gave him a reassuring nod. "We need to move quickly," Lyra said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "The scout ship is just the beginning. We'll need to take it down before the full force of the council arrives. If we don't, this planet, our home, will be lost." Jason swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never been in a battle like this before. He had fought on Earth, in small skirmishes, but this was different. This was a fight for survival, not just for him, but for everyone in the city. And there was no turning back now. The three sisters quickly separated, each one heading toward a different part of the city. Kalis disappeared into the shadows, her dark form blending with the environment. Vena, with her piercing blue eyes, focused on the mental aspects of the battle, preparing herself to manipulate the minds of their enemies. Lyra, with her brilliant mastery over light, would lead the charge. Jason stood at the center of the room, taking a deep breath. He could feel the power within him, the energy from the sand, the light, and even his own body. He had learned to tap into these forces, but now he would need to combine them into one cohesive whole. He had no choice but to trust in his training and believe in himself. He looked up as the sound of a ship grew louder in the distance. The scout ship was close, its engines thrumming in the air. It was a sleek, dark craft, designed for speed and stealth. Jason could already see the small dots of soldiers preparing to deploy. The council was sending everything they had, even if it was just a small scout ship. It was clear they weren't going to take any chances. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jason, stay focused. We'll give you cover. You'll need to strike fast and hard. You've trained for this. Don't hesitate." Jason nodded, his mind sharp, the fear beginning to fade. "I won't hesitate." The city of Solera seemed to fall silent for a moment, as though it was holding its breath. And then, in a flash of brilliant light, Lyra, Kalis, and Vena sprang into action. They were like shadows, moving fast and with purpose as they ran toward the landing zone. Jason followed closely behind, his heart racing with every step. The scout ship was now hovering just above the ground, its engines roaring as it prepared to land. Jason could see the soldiers in the ship's hold, preparing to deploy. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he felt ready. He reached deep within himself, tapping into the power of the desert sands beneath him. He focused on the energy in the earth, willing it to obey his command. Slowly, the sand began to rise, swirling around him in a spiral. The air crackled with energy as Jason drew the sand toward him, shaping it into a shield. He had learned to control it before, but now he was doing something more. He was using the sand as both a defense and a weapon. Jason watched as the scout ship landed, its doors sliding open. The soldiers began to pour out, armored and armed with energy rifles. They were ready for a fight, but they were not prepared for what they would face. Liara was the first to strike. She raised her arms, and a beam of pure light shot from her hands, slicing through the air and crashing into the soldiers. The first wave of attackers was down in an instant, their bodies disintegrating under the intense energy. Kellis was next. She used the desert itself as a weapon, the sand swirling around her as she formed blades of sharp, cutting sand. With lightning speed, she charged forward, slashing through the enemy lines. The soldiers barely had time to react before they were caught off guard by the relentless power of the sand. President Choi smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "We're not as primitive as you think." Jinna Park, a 7-year-old human child, broke through your best security systems with a medical implant. Imagine what our adults can do. The chamber erupted in voices as more representatives pledged support to Earth. The Council's diplomats looked increasingly worried. They had expected Earth to beg for mercy or attempt negotiation. Instead, they faced absolute resolve. 24 hours, President Choi repeated. After that, humanity will show you exactly what primitive means. As the delegates filed out, carrying Earth's message to their homeworlds, Admiral Song approached the podium. "The fleet is ready, Madam President. At your command." President Choi nodded. "They won't surrender. They're too proud, too convinced of their superiority. Make sure our allies' ships are clear of Council space before we begin." The message spread across the galaxy. On thousands of worlds, beings watched the evidence of the Council's crimes. They saw the rescued children, heard their stories, understood the depth of the atrocities committed. In the medical facility where the rescued children were recovering, Jin-Ah watched the broadcast with her parents. When President Choi finished speaking, she turned to her father. "They're really going to fight, aren't they?" Park Min-ho hugged his daughter close. "They hurt children. Our children. The galaxy needs to learn that some lines can't be crossed." As the 24-hour deadline approached, humanity prepared for war. Not a war of conquest or resources, but a war of justice. A war to protect children, not just human children, but all children. The Council had awakened something they didn't understand. They thought they were dealing with primitives. They were about to learn that sometimes primitive wasn't a weakness. Sometimes primitive meant being willing to burn down the galaxy to protect what matters most. The countdown began. Humanity was going to war. The bridge of the UES Infinity fell silent as Fleet Admiral Song studied the holographic display of the target world. Galactic 7, an uninhabited Council planet used for weapons research. The perfect test site for humanity's response. "Begin the countdown," she ordered, her voice carrying no emotion. "All ships maintain safe distance. We only get one chance to demonstrate what Project Nemesis can do." The massive weapon, mounted on a specially built carrier ship, powered up slowly. Its energy readings climbed higher than anything humanity had ever created before. Dr. Lee's voice came through the comm system. "Device at 90% capacity. Target locked." The Council had ignored their ultimatum, just as expected. Now they would learn the price of their arrogance. Fire. The beam that struck Galactic 7 was almost beautiful. It pierced the planet's crust, like a needle through paper. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the planet began to crack, brilliant lines of energy spreading across its surface like glowing veins. Energy reaction spreading through planetary core, reported the science officer. Breakup imminent. Kellex 7 didn't explode, it disintegrated. The planet cracker lived up to its name, reducing an entire world to fragments no larger than a small asteroid. Where a planet had been, now floated a new asteroid field. Admiral Song opened a channel to all Council frequencies. This was a demonstration. You have one more chance to surrender. On the UES Vengeance, Captain Yoon Ha-won watched the destruction with grim satisfaction. His hand touched the photo of his son he kept on his command console, one of the children rescued from Station Delta. The boy's nightmares still hadn't stopped. The Council's response came within hours. More arrogance, more threats. They couldn't believe that humanity would dare strike their core worlds. They were wrong. 3 days later, the planet cracker turned its attention to Vex Prime, the Council's primary shipyard world. This time, they made sure to wait until all civilian ships had evacuated. Humanity would have its revenge, but they wouldn't become monsters in the process. Captain Yoon led the attack on the research facilities. His fleet struck simultaneously at 12 different stations, each one a mirror of Station Delta. The Vengeance's weapons burned through their defenses like paper.
Zira blinked, as if surprised by the question. For a moment, she said nothing, simply studying him. Her hand rested lightly on her hip, and she tilted her head, considering the human's words. It wasn't often that someone asked her what she wanted. Usually, they were too busy trying to survive or make sense of the alien presence in front of them. "I want nothing from you," she replied after a long pause, her voice sharp but not unkind. "I am not here to conquer or destroy. I am here to understand. To see if you are different. But so far, you seem like all the others." Mark frowned, confused by her answer. "The others? What do you mean?" Zira took a step back, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon. "The others who have tried to challenge me, to show their strength. Most think they can defeat me, or at least show me their power. But they fail, and I grow bored of their weakness. But you're different." Her eyes flicked back to him, her smirk returning. "You speak with conviction, but do you have the strength to back it up?" Mark could feel the challenge in her words, but something inside him refused to back down. He didn't know what this was about, but he wasn't going to let it go unanswered. "I don't know what you're looking for, Zira," he said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "But I'm not here to prove something to you. I'm here because something tells me that we're not so different after all. Maybe you've fought many battles, maybe you've conquered worlds, but maybe, just maybe, you're looking for something else." Zira's expression shifted, a flicker of something unfamiliar crossing her face. For a moment, her confident demeanor faltered. She hadn't expected that. In her long life, she had faced countless beings, yet no one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared to look beyond the surface, to challenge her not just with power, but with understanding. Her gaze softened slightly, and she regarded Mark in a new light. Maybe this human wasn't as insignificant as she had first thought. Maybe there was more to him than his size, more to his heart than his words could say. "Perhaps you're right," Zira said slowly, her voice quieter now, almost contemplative. "Perhaps I have been too quick to judge. But that doesn't mean I'll make it easy for you." Mark smiled faintly, his heart still racing. The encounter wasn't over, but it had changed. The first step had been taken, and that he knew was just the beginning. The sky above seemed endless, stretching far beyond the horizon in all directions. Stars twinkled like little specks of dust scattered across the dark expanse of space, casting their faint glow over the land below. The night air was cool, almost crisp, but it did nothing to dull the tension that hung between Mark and Zira. Mark stood tall, though he was aware of the vast difference in their size. Zara, the alien before him, was still towering, her presence almost overwhelming. But something in his chest, this strange, persistent feeling that had been growing since the moment he first locked eyes with her, refused to let him back down. He had to prove to her, to himself, that he was more than just some weak, fragile human. Zira studied him carefully, her bright, glowing eyes scanning him from head to toe. She was still intrigued by him. There was something about Mark, something that had caught her attention in a way that she hadn't felt before. Most humans she had met were either afraid or eager to please. But Mark? He didn't beg for mercy, and he didn't try to fight her directly either. He was different. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice smooth and commanding. "I see you don't fear me. That's unexpected." Mark didn't flinch at her words. He had expected her to try and intimidate him, to use her towering figure and her alien powers to scare him into submission. But that wasn't what was happening here. This was a different kind of challenge. Zira wasn't just physically powerful, there was a sharpness in her mind, a cleverness that made her seem like she was always a few steps ahead. And it was clear now that this encounter wasn't about brute strength. It was about something deeper. "I'm not afraid of you," Mark said, his voice steady. "But I'm not here to fight you, either." Zira's lips curved into a small smile, almost like she was amused by his response. She crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture that emphasized her confidence and strength. "So you think you can just stand there and talk your way out of this? Do you really believe words alone will make you worthy?" Mark knew this was the moment he had to prove something. He wasn't the strongest person alive. He didn't have special powers like Zaira. He wasn't capable of feats of strength or combat skills like some of the warriors she had undoubtedly faced in the past. But he had something else.